Hello, Wasatch fourth graders. This week, Mrs. Lee is teaching you watercolor techniques. We're not making any project actually, but you can just watch my video and learn how to use the watercolor set that we use at Wasatch. Okay, so this is what we have here. Okay, you have seen something like that before. Okay, and when you open it, so there are different colors, okay, but we don't have white. Watercolors uses the white color of the paper to show the white. Okay, and on the lid, there are some divisions here, and then this lid does not work just as a lid, but this works as a platform to mix and prepare the paints. And of course we will need the brush, and watercolor takes water to work. Okay, so that's what we are going to use in the future watercolor art lessons. Okay, all right, so I have a panel here that shows different watercolor techniques. This is actually a large panel, but I'm going to teach you one by one how to use this technique. The first technique that I'm going to talk about is called wet on dry. Okay, it comes with a fancy name, but it simply means wet paint on a dry paper. And you have done this so many times before. So you just paint it with watercolor as normal, as usual. And then that method actually has a name to it, wet on dry. Now compared to wet on dry, this one is called wet on wet. Okay? In order to use a wet and wet technique, watercolorists soak the whole paper before you paint anything. You make the paper dripping wet and then put the wet paint on it. Well, you know the paints are always usually wet, and when you do that, you don't get the clear edges compared to wet on dry. And it just become blurry, and the two colors mix together, and then you get the wet on wet effect. Okay, all right. The next one that I want to show you is something that you have used in the past. Okay, have you ever used the crayon first and draw it with the crayon first, and then go over with the watercolor on top of it? Yeah, I'm sure many of you have done that before. That technique actually has a name with it, okay, and it is called wax resist. Okay, so on this one, I drew a yellow and white sparkles and snowflakes before, and then went over with the blue watercolor all over. But where the crayons are, the watercolors would not get on the paper, so even the white color would show up. Okay. On this one, I drew a brick wall, and I drew a brick line first with the orange crayon, and I went all over with the orange watercolor. Okay, all right. The next technique is called scratch, right here, the one in the middle. Okay, now see the leaf design. Okay, now I did not paint that, or I did not draw all these lines with the crayons or color pencils. I simply scratched it. So what you will do is you paint, after you paint with normal color, okay, while the paint is still wet, you flip the paintbrush and then you scratch the paint surface. And then you can draw lines, designs, even letters. And those scratched parts become darker than the rest of the parts, and then you end up with the scratch technique like that. All right. Okay, the next technique is called the dry brush. You've done this before too. Okay, so without putting so much water on the brush, while the brush is really dry, you touch the watercolor cake, those colors, and tickle, and then try to paint it, and then you end up with hairy-like texture. Okay? And this scratch technique is very useful when you try to paint something comes with texture, like a grass or the basket surface or something like that. But you cannot use the dry brush technique for smooth surface. Like, we don't want hairy sky or hairy water. So we have to be careful where to use the dry brush technique. Okay, now, let's talk about this one right here. This one is called wash and lift. Wash technique is called wash because you paint the clean surface just as you wash in the windows, left and right, right and left, and kind like washing windows. And this technique is used to paint somewhere super smooth. Watercolors use wash technique to paint the skies often. Okay. And wash and lift. Okay, let's look at the lift part. Okay. The lift means simply lift off the color. Okay. You can use an artist sponge, or even if you don't have that, you can use a piece of tissue to lift and wipe the color off. This is a technique that can be often used to create clouds in the sky. Right. Now, the last technique is called salt. And I have to show you a super detail. See that speckle on that painted surface? Okay. Now, I did not paint that. What I did was, after I paint normally with the regular watercolor, I use salt, just a table salt, and sprinkled on it while it's still wet. Okay? And you patiently wait 10, 15, sometimes takes 20 minutes. Okay? And these salt sucks up the watercolor color pigment, and creates this nice speckled pattern. Okay, this technique is called simply salt. Okay. Now, so those are watercolor different techniques, but I want to use how to use the lid of this watercolor kit. Okay, before I go. Okay. Now, if you're just painting a small surface, okay, you can go directly to that color cake, and touch it and paint it. But sometimes you painting like entire sky or the entire field, and you need a lot of paint for that. And if that's the case, you need to prepare the paint on the lid. To do that, what you will do is dip the brush in the clean water. It doesn't have to be completely clean. Okay? And squeeze the water into the brush like this. Squeeze into the brush. Now, of course, you don't have to be holding this watercolor set like I'm doing right now. I have to do it just to show you. But just leave this on the table and use both hands and squeeze the water. As many times as you would need. At least 5 times. Okay, sometimes if you need a lot of water, you might have to squeeze like 10 times. Depends on the size of the brush too. If you're using a big brush, you don't have to go back and forth too much. Okay, And then after the water gets on this lid part, and then you touch the color of your choice and tickle, 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 and get the watercolor on your brush and bring it over to the water that you have just prepared. Now, I cannot tilt too much because I might spill it over my computer, but see what I'm doing. So this is how you prepare the paint. Now if you do this, you don't have to worry about running out the necessary paint or end up with a different consistency, thickness, darkness, lightness on the one same surface. Okay, so it's really important to prepare the paint first. And one good thing about preparing the paint is if you want to mix the colors. For example, if I want to make, I just have blue here. If you want to bring in a little bit of red and prepare not quite purple, but a little bit of reddish, bluish color, then you can mix and create your own color, okay, without messing up these original colors up here. Because if you just try to mix the colors, mix it here and here, especially yellow, that yellow is going to disappear. It's going to be, you can't get the pure yellow anymore. Okay, so that's how you prepare the paint on the lid, and it's really important. You can't really call it a technique, but important thing to do if you're painting a large surface or try to create your own color. All right, so that's all the techniques that I need to teach you today. Hopefully in the near future, when the art room is available, we can use this technique to create the watercolor project. All right, thank you for watching, and I will see you next week. Goodbye.